In the game of Monopoly, players showcase their ambitions, money management skills, asset building strategies, and to outwit their opponents. And with the properties and cash and dice, titles, utilities, and penalties, the goal is to accumulate wealth, force others to quit, to go bankrupt, and surprisingly, in today's society, mirrors the game in many ways. However, there is something missing, and that's what we're here to talk about live on My Stoic Circus. All right, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to my Stoic Circus. And today we're going to talk about the game of Monopoly. Are you playing the game or are you being played? Now, it is that time of year for December. Many people will be buying gifts. They will take their holdings. They will go into debt. They will do a lot of things. But also at the same time, it's the end of the year and people start allegedly planning for their future. But have they given thought about the game that they've played so far? Yes, the life game, how we actually interpret our assets, our beliefs, our plans for success and happiness in the future. I think that's something that's very important that we cannot forget. Now, I remember the first time I ever laid my eyes on the game of Monopoly. I was probably about 7 or 8 years old. And I had seen my mother with her friends play this board game. And I'm like, what's this board with all these things on it? I mean, being a kid and being curious, having some kind of wit, I saw little symbols like a thimble, a dog, a car, a hat, something to represent the player's piece. And on the board, we had properties. We had directions of when you pass go, collect $200, go to jail, utilities, railroads, properties, and then the symbols of actual assets. That means houses and hotels, property deeds, and last but not least, the cash. Now, there's usually four players on the board game. There's four different positions around the table. Now, if you can have more players on the board if you want, but essentially it was designed really for four players. Where did Monopoly really come from? Well, in 1902, there was a game designer and feminist. Her name was Elizabeth Maggie. And where Elizabeth J. Maggie Phillips, so to speak, born in 1866, was an American game designer and feminist and a Georgist, which I really don't know, but she designed the game called the Landlord's Game, the precursor to Monopoly. And to illustrate its teachings was of progressive era economics. Now, in this time, she had designed a game to show that a couple of things to how to actually look at in which the way that people accumulate wealth, manage wealth, and actually how they have to pay taxes. The landlord's game, Maggie first made her game known as I was saying, for her friends in Brentwood, Maryland, I believe. And in 1903, Maggie applied for the U.S. Patent Office for a patent of her board game. She was granted the U.S. patent, and 7,406 no 748,626 on January 5th, 1904. Maggie received her patent before women were allowed to legally vote. Now, why was this so important? Because at this time, women's rights in which they had were very limited. How they could manage business, money, assets, very limited scope. And before the women had actual rights to vote in the United States, this was a game that in which she had observed her father and many others around wealth and how they managed and how they get. So she made this game for people, and eventually, I believe in was it 1902 or wait, let me go back and fact check this real quick. 1903, the game was patented. The game Monopoly came to Parker Brothers later, in the 20th century. And that by 1933, the board game had been created much like the modern version of Monopoly, sold by Parker Brothers. Now, since that time, what's really interesting is that there's been more than 230 million copies of the game has been sold. That's what it was saying, according to Wikipedia. Now, what's so interesting as we look really at the game Monopoly, let's look at life. You're born into however the status you may be. It may be rich, it may be poor, it may be middle class. And from the inception of your life, the day one, you were cared for, you were coddled, and then eventually guided in which a way of living you're going to eventually evolve to. You're going to be an adult. You're going to manage your own family if you have one, or you're going to manage your own affairs of your life, leading you all to a direction, right? Survival of the fittest is played, just like in the game Monopoly. Now, in the game Monopoly, you're initiated first with some cash. You get a certain amount of money to start off with. You don't just start with zero, which may not necessarily be exactly like life when you first become an adult and now the age is of 18. When we look at actually what has taken place, we look at how you start out. Your parents guide you, tell you to go to college, get educated, be skilled in your education to have a profession or position. And that's where it gets more interesting. But along the way, you're learning many things. You're learning about love, you're learning about care, self care, community. You're learning many different things, cultural aspects, belief patterns, um, what's most important, family or wealth, whatever, what have you. These things are represented within the game, but they're also represented on something else and something sinister that we all should bear in mind. How we actually deliberate on what is the most important aspects of yourself. Now we have the emotional side, and the Stoics will really talk about what do you truly own. Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and even Seneca would say that the most invaluable thing that you have is understanding what you actually control. And that means your mind, your mouth, and what you understand before anyone else. Now imagine that being the number one thing, the aspect of you being a player on the board game itself, right? You're in the real life board game. Now, you may have been born to a disposition that is poor, but it doesn't necessarily count you out. You start out, you are taught, you are guided, sometimes emotionally, irrationally, or sometimes very firmly and with a good grasp on what is important to you. Now, you go out there, you get educated, you get your position. You're going to have to work through some styles of apprenticeship. Nothing is necessarily all the way granted to you. Even if you're born into wealth, you still have to go by a trial by fire. But your parents or your guardians may have taught you improperly the values of a person or people, or maybe they have taught you the values, vice versa. So when we look at that and we look at actually how the board game is played and how we actually march to those teachings before we're out on our own, and then it gets even more interesting. We have to work with other people. We have to work with other people, companies, organizations, and belief standards outside of the guidance of what we've gotten. But the Stoics really want to tell you that before you really dive into anyone else's philosophy or ideas of success, that you specifically must be in emotional control. And why is that so important? It's so important because there will be many times that you want to give the excuse exactly of why you haven't succeeded. Now, you may be young, or maybe you're old and you may be realizing this, older, I should say. I didn't grasp on the concept of monopoly until later in life, after I made many bad choices, right? But I've also made some good choices along the way. I developed my character and keep working on that. It's not finished until I'm dead, so to speak. But with the teachings of the Stoics, the teachings of many people and mentors, I've collected data that actually puts actionable steps that makes me a better person. Now, I've seen people who really dove into their career from after they graduated high school or finishing school, college, university, and then their profession become lawyers, doctors, um, accountants, plumbers, contractors, and they get their resources. They get paid for doing something. And I've noticed within the last 30 years, I'm 51 years old now. I noticed in the last 30 years specifically that the illusion the illusion of guiding your child or your person into an actual profession is not as important. The sense of self, entitlements are really more apparent. Now, just like on the game of Monopoly, if you don't watch your steps as you roll the dice in every action you make, it has consequences. It has results. Just like Jack Canfield would say in his Success Principles book, he would say event plus response equals the outcome. Every time you roll the dice, you make an action, you get paid, or you're paying somebody something. The exchanges are very, very important. Now, how you get around the board each time you come around, let's just say it's 1 year of actions, landings, spending, or gaining, it's going to be up to you. Now, what's interesting about when you play the game Monopoly, you're out to beat your friends. That's right, your friends, your family. And I have seen people literally lose their cool in just playing a game that actually doesn't have real assets or real money. But if it did, the human spirit can turn quite ravage and savagely against one another. And if you think about it, in real life, that's really what's happening. There's plenty of people professing of what to do and how to become successful if you do these things. Don't work a profession. Don't work too much in one man's ideas or woman. Now, when Elizabeth Maggie designed this game, she was in the deficit. She didn't necessarily have all business rights like a man would. And she was a feminist to get the place of the woman to be seen and heard. But she had learned from her mentors, including her father, and the wealth of people that came from. Now, this game, the landlord's game, was exclusive to the wealthy, to the rich. And eventually, like I said, was sold to Parker Brothers. And Parker Brothers sold it to everybody. Now, if you were to teach ambition and concept of holdings, Monopoly would probably be the good game to really look at. To teach emotionally, control your emotions and your impulses. Look at where you put your money every time you land somewhere. You know, are you building and leveling the game up? When we think about these things and we think about actually what has taken place, I ask the question, are you playing it or are you being played? Well, for a time being, I felt like I was being played. But after being played in my position, I took accountability. I looked at what was actually taking place for myself. And then I decided, okay, every move I make is going to go into a pot of results. And at the end of the week or the end of the month, the end of the year, do these results get me to the goals and where I want to be? Do I even know what I want to be? These are careful questions that you can put into your life strategy for yourself. That's right, yourself. When you look at actually what is taking place for you, right? And the things that you hold dear, your family, which I do have. I have a wonderful lady. My partner is an amazing woman, and I also have three wonderful daughters. And my responsibility is to take care of them in some fashion or form, even if they're adults. Now, people had talked to me recently about legacy. And what was so interesting that I made I think was a brilliant point about legacy is people were saying, well, your legacy is for your kids. And I'm like, that would be true if your kids carry on your work. Key, right? Your kids nowadays have the choice to become whoever they want after a certain age, after or emancipation. And after the age more likely of 18, they can go legally choose whatever direction they want. And if they have the right skills that you've done your diligence to raise them to become adults, they will manage finances, emotions, relationships, and positions as well as their roles in life and community, they will be able to go forward and become what we deem as successful, right? And what that definition of successful isn't necessarily going to be defined by me. It's going to be defined by you. And when you look at that, how you're defined and what makes you happy, or you resort happiness like a bank, and how you spend it is really how you're going to put the details. I've been in many discussions where people talk about goals and how to achieve and how to get discipline. And those are great things. But what I love about Stoicism specifically, I look at guys like Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, and many, many others, and even current Stoics like Ryan Holiday and others, and even what's his name? God, there's so many speakers. There's there's Tony Robbins, there's Mel Robbins, um, and Timothy Ferriss. Timothy Ferriss has a lot to say, and even Robin Sharma, I would call him a Stoic to some degree. These people have learned to really work well at mastering their emotions, yet let them live the best that they can. The issues or the obstacles is the monopolies that we're going to go through. And the best versions that we can see in monopolies is the stores and the commerce we conduct, where we can go shopping, how much things cost, what is truly valuable. Those things matter in the long run. So when you're actually looking at playing the game, many people nowadays they don't cook for themselves. They take very little care. They buy optional services, cleaning things, cleaning services, personal assistance. It's happening more often. But what people actually do and how they conduct themselves for themselves to learn manual skills to manage for themselves is very, very important too. Things have gotten more costly when you want to go to the grocery store or even go out to eat. A simple meal does not going to cost no $7 or under 10. More than likely, it's going to cost $15 and up. Now that's a lot of money. Now imagine the average consumer makes a certain level of living. And here in California, I believe the minimum wage is $15. Now imagine you are a minimum wage worker, right? You get paid for 1 hour's work, $15. Now, it's a portion of that is going to be taxed, right? And you work enough hours, you work enough minimal labor paid hours. Doesn't mean skill. It just means that the minimum skill you are being paid for is $15. Doesn't mean you don't have more skills. It's just what's according to that job. Now, at the end of the day, the tally is accumulated. You've worked 8 hours, maybe 10 hours. You get that amount of money, and then it accumulates to a payday. And once you get paid, you look at that amount and then you go and you buy fast food or things like that. And you look how quickly dwindled down that paycheck is. Then you start looking at the essentials. How do I survive? How do I live? What do I eat? What do I drive? All these things accumulate and they go into the mix of the game of Monopoly in life. Eventually, you're going to want to get educated and being paid for more mental skills than physical skills. But that's not to say that people with mental and physical skills aren't valuable. The electricians, the carpenters, the concrete masons, the butchers, the barbers, those people were almost forgotten. Many people were directed and have been directed to an intellectual operation of living and not manual skills. But some people said, no, 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 I'm not going to do that. And these customizable skills that they'd have, whether it be, like I've said, a barber or a butcher, came back and they guided their kids. And some people are training generational family members to create a legacy. But because they have that free choice to choose, it's not so easy to get into the profession. Many people don't want to go through the apprenticeship process to becoming the professional them, because I believe that Plato or Socrates said that a man only truly has one profession, right? You can't have multiple. And some people might argue that. But when we look at actual professions, we look at the game of life, we look at management skills, we look at the emotional self. Like I said, the Stoics would tell you manage your emotions before your money. Why? Because of impulses, luxuries. When you think about what you don't want to be the one without. You don't want to be the one without a nice car or being able to go on vacation. I remember growing up hearing my friends going skiing for the Christmas holiday, and I'm like, "What's skiing?" And then they would show me pictures, and I'm like, "Oh wow." Eventually, I would feel bad because I don't have that stuff. And then the greed starts going in, the falsehood, the fear of missing out as a child started to evolve into adult mannerisms. And we call this the imposter syndrome, promoting something long enough to where it doesn't exist, but we hope that it will. But see, when the Stoics talk about managing your emotions, manage your impulses, then we begin to understand smart strategy, life skill playing. Maybe I can hold back on not going out to eat, cooking simple meals. Do not spend too much money on luxuries and entertainment. And if you really look at many people's expenses, a big portion of their pay is spent on entertainment, luxuries that cannot be sustained, and they don't elevate their skills. I was talking to a friend of mine, and he was telling me that he wish he could get his son from out from the screen and playing video games and look at him. And I said, "Well, who gave him the video games?" And he got quiet and he looked and he's like, "You're right. I should take it away." Aha. But it comes with consequences. It comes with a mountain of emotional consequences and a series of fighting because that child or that son of his is addicted to lights, action, fast action, clicks, booms, navigation in a meta style world that doesn't truly exist, but in the his self imagination and constant adrenaline hits of excitement. And taking him away from that is like taking alcoholic away from his first drink away from him more than 24 hours. You're going to have explosions of emotional self, disruption, resorts of irrational behavior. And then you have to ask yourself, can it ever go back? More than likely not. So I've constantly told people look at the value in which you deliberate with your kids. Do not buy devices to babysit your child. Now, I've done this with some of my kids. I bought iPads and I bought phones and I bought apps and I paid for all these things. And what was the result of that? Well, with my middle daughter, a lot of loss and missing out sometimes and wanting dad to be involved when dad was busy with other things, but that was the mentor. And the results of which I've had to struggle and go and reconnect with my daughter, with my middle daughter. And I love her dearly. And she is now deciding her own choice, her own path. So that's real connection. Now, the game Monopoly really, as I look back at it, I look at my emotional self. Am I playing my resources to the best of my ability? Am I saving? Am I giving it away? You know, and a lot of us are giving it away. But what Monopoly does in looking at the strategies of taking your little thimble or taking your car to the next maneuver, the next maneuver, and the next maneuver, and collecting that $200, or every time someone lands on your property, them paying you rent. That's right, them paying you rent. And don't forget, every time you land on a certain position, you have to draw a card. Oh, got to pay utility tax, $500. Boom, and he didn't see it coming. It came, it happened. And after a period of time, the game eventually wears people out. Either they've run out of money, they've run out of assets, they can't make moves, and they have to quit. How close is that to what real life is? And like I said, are you preparing your kids or yourself for that real game? You submit. Now, people have had many different struggles and hoops that they've had to go through. And when you actually look at the game and you look at your own greed, what do you truly manage? When you truly manage yourself and you look at what's actually taking place, you may not want to dive into the world's events of the news or the personal debates. You're going to actually look at like what keeps me on the level right where I'm at. I'm not willing to sell my data or I'm not willing to sell my identity for quick, easy schemes. That's right, schemes. The more I save, the more I retain, the more better I can position myself to make better moves. Some people will tell you real estate. Some people will tell you invest in Bitcoin, do this and that. A lot of people. But one thing I remember recently in reading The Richest Man in Babylon, it would say, as long as you can operate by a couple of key principles, every time you get paid 10%, no less than 10% must be retained within your own purse. Before you pay your debts, before you pay anyone else, 10% goes to you and accumulating that. And he would say in the book, the writer, he would say that your purse, your coins in your purse must grow children. Your coins in your purse are children and they grow children. Master that art, but while mastering your own emotions and your impulses. Then ask, he would also say in the book, he says, hey, don't seek out advice from those who don't do. Would a bricklayer be the person to go purchase gems, as he explains in his story, to buy from a gem dealer? The gem dealer is probably going to get over him and sell him some crystal, in which he did explain in the first couple chapters of his book. He did say that it's like, hey, lesson number one, understand who actually has the information and has proof of that information that it actually works. If I'm going to buy precious gems, then I'm going to look at exactly who deals with gems and what are gems. How do I evaluate that? How do I evaluate, let's say, property? What's the most important? It takes time. An apprenticeship to making assets and money takes time. It's not done all in one day or one course. Start evaluating your decisions, basically. Look at your emotional self. Keep saving, keep working. And you're only to work your position for so long, then you elevate, then you become management. But many people are lacking management skills and want leadership, but they never solved a major problem, the emotional self. Well, that's all the time that I have for my Stoic Circus. I hope that this particular episode will help you as you go forward today. And by the end of the year, start building practices. Manage your emotions, number one. And if you don't know how to do that, start with every decision, that I ask myself. And I wrote it down here on my calendar. This is before every purchase. How can I use this thing or service? Number one. Two, why must I use this or do this? Number three, when will I use this? Use those three questions. And if you can do that, more than likely you will aid yourself in discernment and more. Well, that's all the time that I have. I hope that you all have a great day, and we'll see you all next time on my Stoic Circus.